All right, so on page 10, we're just first going to go over how you actually make these trinomials a perfect square trinomial. Okay, and the whole point of making it a perfect square trinomial is so it'll factor easily. But for right now, we're going to just go over how do you get the C term. Notice in all of these, the C term is missing. Okay, so we want to know what the C term would be if this is a what we call a perfect square trinomial. So this is what you do. Okay, it's a fairly easy process. So to get what C equals to, you're going to take the B term, and I'll put it above the directions, and you're going to divide it by 2, and then you're going to square it. Okay, so that's how we're going to get the C term. So whatever the B term is, we're going to just cut it in half and then square that number, and that will give us what we call a perfect square trinomial. So in this case, the B term is 10. So I'm going to write 10 divided by 2, which I know is 5. And 5 squared is what? 25. So in this case, C equals 25. Okay, that's all you do. Okay, so all we're doing is just trying to make it a perfect square trinomial. So in number 72, I'll do the same thing. The B term is negative 6. I'm going to divide that by 2. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Negative 3 squared is a positive 9. So C equals 9. So all we're doing is just making it a perfect square trinomial. Now, when we do that, I want you to see what happens. So when we have this perfect square trinomial, then it's easy to factor it. And this is where some of you kind of, got a little confused on the test. This is easy to factor because the factors then would just be taking the square root of the first term, which is 1. So that's like 1y. And taking the square root of this last term, which is 5. So that's how we get y plus 5 to the second power. So if you're able to recognize it's one of those special cases, it's very easy to factor it as well. So like this one over here would be m squared minus 6m plus 9, which means take the square root of 1, which is 1m, take the square root of 9, which is 3. But since this is a negative 6, that has to be a minus, and that would then be to the second power. So that's how that, perfect square trinomial works when you actually factor it. So let's do a couple more. We're not going to really stay on this topic very long. Okay, so we're going to do half of 34. What's negative 34 divided by 2? Okay, so what is negative 17 squared? A positive what? All right, so 289. So that would be your value for C. Okay, what is half of negative 36? What's negative 36 divided by 2? And what is 18 squared? Okay, it is going to be a positive answer because we're squaring a negative. So what is negative 18 times negative 18? What does that give us? 324. Okay, so when that's the case, again, you just simply take the square root of these numbers of the first and the last terms, and it's very easy to factor. So this will just be x, or z's if you want to do that, minus 17 to the second power. Okay, because you're really just taking the square root of the 289. Now you can do the same thing even if it's a fraction. Okay, because we know how to work with fractions. So you would take the negative 16 fifths, and you have calculators, so this isn't hard, and you would divide it by 2. But dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by half. Okay, that's the same thing as multiplying by half, because when you change division to multiplication, you take the reciprocal. So it's the same thing. So that's going to give us negative 16 over 10, which we can reduce to negative 8 what? over 5, and then we just square that. Okay, because remember we got to divide it by 2 and square it. So when I square negative 8, what do I get? 64. And when I square 5, what do I get? 25. So there is your value for C. So even with fractions, it will work. Okay, because fractions are numbers too. All right. Now, one other thing I want to go over with you before we take a look at some word problems. Take a look at page 9. So these are equations, and it says solve each equation by taking the square roots. So these are quadratic. Now, how do I know this is a quadratic equation? What gives it away? The squared. Very good. So technically, and let me show you this because I want you guys to see this, how it can work out both ways. So let's just take this one since it's a small number, it's easy. So if I set this equal to 0, I would move the 4 to the other side. Is that correct? So remember, this is one of those special cases with factoring because it's a binomial and both numbers are perfect squares. So you can just factor it x plus 2, x minus 2. Who remembers doing that? All right, great. So then you would set your factors equal to 0. And then your x-intercepts will be -2 and +2. All right, so that is definitely what, we already know how to do. We could move this 50 over, set it equal to 0, factor out a 2, and factor it. Okay, we could do this one the same way. Move the 18 over, set it equal to 0, factor it, and get our solutions. Okay, however, here's another option. So I'm going to show you a different way of solving the same problem. So we already know the answers are 2 and -2. So I'm going to show you a quicker way to do it when you only have these two terms like this. This is all you have to do. So it is an equation. Okay. So how do I undo a square? You take the square root. So this is all I would need to do is take the square root. And of course, whatever you do on one side of the equation, you have to do on the other side of the equation. So when you take the square root, it really just gets rid of that square. So that means I have x here equals, and whenever I take the square root of a number, I use the plus and minus, which stands for positive and negative. And what is the square root of 4? 2. Same answer. I did it without factoring. I just solved the equation. Okay. So I could do this one the same way. This, first thing you have to do though is isolate and put isolate. That means get it by itself. Isolate the x squared term or the squared term. Okay, because it doesn't always have to be x. So this is already isolated. Take the square root. P equals plus or minus 8. That means positive or negative. So you can still write it this way. -8 and +8. -2 and +2. Okay, same answer we got by factoring it. Okay, so what would I do here? I would first get the squared term by itself. So since k squared is being multiplied by -2, I would divide by what? -2. Okay, because you got to get the squared term by itself. You ready? Okay, so then that's going to give me k squared equals what? 25. Okay, because we're dividing by 2. So now take the square root. So k equals positive and -5. All right, so when you have just two terms like that, that is definitely an option, even if it doesn't come out to be a perfect square. You can take the square root of a number that's not perfect and just simply round it. Okay, so you might not end up with nice integers. You might end up taking the square root of 39, which is fine, and then you just round it to the hundredths place. Is everybody okay with those? Okay, it's just an easy way to get your solutions when you only have like the A term and the C term. I want you to know that's an option. Okay? All right, very good. So let's move on to some word problems that you guys just love. doing? I was being funny, but anyway. Okay. All right. So we're on page, I believe it's 19. Okay, so on page 19, you're going to see some word problems. And so they're going to give you these word problems, and all of them will have an equation embedded in them. Okay, and usually the equations start off with like negative 16t squared, or negative 34, or negative 64, or negative 32, I meant to say. These are velocity types of problems. And so either you're diving off of something, or throwing a ball, or in this case, this person is jumping off a platform. Okay, so it says here's a diver, jumps off a 30-foot platform. And really, guys, this is just unnecessary kind of information because they give you what the equation is. So the 30-foot platform with an initial velocity of 16 feet per second, and the equation can be modeled here. So this is the most important part of all of that, the equation. So then it says, how long would it take before the diver hits the water? Now, keep in mind, if you're diving off, what you're going to follow is the shape of a parabola. Okay, because you go up, and then at some point you go down into the water, right? So what they want you to say is, really, this acts like the x-intercept. Agreed? So think of, what I'm trying to find is when it hits the water, that means like you're hitting the x-axis. So you just really want to know what the x-intercept is. Okay, that will give you, your values that you're looking for. So what I'm going to ask you to do first is to find the discriminant. So I'm going to give you a second. Okay, I'm going to pause this, give you a second to find the x-intercept, and then we'll apply it, into the quadratic formula. Discriminant first. So you're using b squared minus 4ac. So here's your a term, here's your b term, here's your c term. Find the discriminant. All right, so 2176 is correct. Okay, this is what you should have. 2,176. So now this is the discriminant over here. I put it off to the side. B squared minus 4ac comes out to be 2176. Once you have that, we're going to use a quadratic formula. So we're going to say x equals the opposite of b. Opposite of b term is negative 16 plus or minus the square root of 2176 divided by 2a, which comes out to be negative 32. Okay, now this is a nice way you can put it all into the calculator at one time, right over here. Now you still got to write it down. It doesn't substitute your work, so you still, but you can type it in instead of actually finding out what is the square root of 2176. You can type it all in at the same time. So everybody type this in for me: negative 16 plus the square root of 2176, and then hit enter. Please hit enter first. Do not divide it by negative 32 yet. So when you hit enter, this is what you should get: 30.647 and so on. How many people got that? Okay, good. So all I want you to do was just type in this part right here, and you should get the 30.6476 and so on. Okay, now hit the division key and divide it by the negative 32. So do you get negative 0.9577 and all of that? Okay, so just round it to like negative 0.96. Okay, because we're just going to go out two places, right? So now, keep in mind, can time be negative? No, so that's not going to be our answer, okay? Because we can't have negative time. So let's try the other one. Type in and write down negative 16 minus the square root of 2176 and hit enter. Make sure you get this answer right here, which is negative 62.64 something. Okay, try it out. And again, you have to try it. You just can't rely on, it's right. Okay, you got to try it on your own. and then hit the division key and put -32. You should get like 1.9577 and so on, which we're going to round simply to 1.96 seconds. Okay, now that makes sense. Okay, 1.96 is the answer because this cannot be the answer because it's negative. And usually that happens. You'll end up with one negative number, one positive number. You know it can't be the negative number because we can't have negative time. Okay? All right, any questions on the first example? Okay. All right, so this one, since it's 2 feet off the ground, we set it equal to 2, but in order for us to solve it, we have to set it equal to 0. Okay, so to do that, what do I do? Yes. You minus 2 to the other constant. Okay? So go ahead and do that. So when you subtract this 2 to the other side, it's not going to equal to 2. We want it to equal to 0. Okay, we're going to get this right here. Okay, so this is what we have because we subtracted the 2 over here, and now this equals to 3. So now I want you to find the discriminant. Okay, so use that equation to find the discriminant. Okay, so make sure you write down -24 plus the square root of 768. Okay, write it down first before you type it in. You would hit enter once you type it in, and then divide that by the -32. Okay, make sure you're getting these numbers. Okay, but please, guys, when you separate it into two parts, and I should tell you to do this when you write it down, always say x equals. Okay, so that should be an x equals -24 plus the square root of 768. Hit enter, then divide that by -32. How many people got -0.116 and so on? Great. So now we're going to do the same thing, but instead of being a plus, we're going to change it to a minus. Okay, so we're going to say x equals again. Make sure you write that first before typing it in, because this is what I would require you to show on a test. So you'll write down x equals -24 minus the square root of 768. Make sure you hit enter, then divide it by -32, and you should come out with approximately 1.62 seconds. Okay, how many people were able to get 1.62 seconds? All right, great. Great. Okay. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let you do question number 3 on your own, and then we'll come back and check it together. A -2. Okay, so this is just an option. If you don't want to use a quadratic formula and you're good with factoring, this is another way of getting the same answer of 11.88. So when I factored the -2t out, because I want the t squared term to be positive, so I took out a -2t, I ended up with 8t minus 95. And then you just set them equal to 0. Set that one equal to 0, set it equal to 0, and solve it, and you get the same answer. Okay? This you might not see as clearly, and that's why the quadratic formula will give you the exact same answer. Okay? So it doesn't matter. I can't see that, I can't factor numbers that big, then just use a quadratic formula. Okay, so that's always your fallback, is to just, use a quadratic formula. So I just want you to know that it's definitely an option, okay, with factoring. All right, so